it's a globally accessible knowledge base of adversary tactics, techniques. So basically, in summary, what this means is that we have been able to observe what the typical steps that different threat actors will take, from them trying to do reconnaissance to get initial access to that particular environment or that endpoint to be able to execute whatever malicious payload they have, to their attempts to be able to remain persistent, just to make sure that even if you were to reboot that particular machine, they still have connectivity to it remotely. Once they're on that machine, being able to escalate the privileges to get, for example, to root level admin privileges, to be able to prevent being detected by different security protections that you have installed on that particular machine. So in summary, you can see the common steps that will be taken by different threat actors are actually known. And if you get into the details, you can see that for each tactic, we actually have the different techniques. So for example, let's say lateral movement. So already gained access to a particular environment. So now you want to be able to move laterally, see if there are other, see what other endpoints are in that environment, see which operating system they are running, is the operating system patched or not, which other third-party applications are running on those endpoints, are they, do they have vulnerabilities or not. So let's see, lateral movement, you can be able to select on it. And then once you select on it, you can see it will be able to give you detail, for example, what is lateral movement. And then now, based on this, we can now be able to see the different techniques that are being used here. So the tactic is lateral movement. The techniques are here. So one of them will be exploitation of remote services. So the attacker is already in your environment. They want to be able to compromise additional devices or just move from one machine to the next, looking, for example, for sensitive data. So one of the services they can exploit is remote services. And then here you can see that, it's telling you, here an adversary is targeting exploits to be able to get unauthorized access to internal systems. They are leveraging that network connectivity. It can be exploitation of a software vulnerability. And if you were to click on this, we can actually be able to get even additional details. So who are some of the main advanced persistent threat groups that have been seen to make use of this particular tactic? So you can see here APT 28. This is one of the well-known threat actors group. And so even you can see here we have Lucifer, another APT group, and so you can be able to see all this information. So again, this is one of the sources that we will touch about that relates to open source intelligence. But in summary, I hope you've been able to see the main intention for us looking at the MITRE attack. It's basically, we want to be able to understand the tactic, and then for each tactic, we can be able to see the techniques. And so if all this is already known, it means that if we come back here, advanced and targeted attacks using known tactics, techniques, and procedures, you see where we are coming from with respect to this. And so we can be able to use now machine learning and behavior-based detection to be able to identify these threats for this particular category. Then at the very top of this pyramid, we have 0.1% of the overall threats. Here we are talking about advanced persistent threat actors that are now, have a very specific target in mind. And then here you see they're using unknown tactics, techniques, and procedures. So definitely the grouping that is working here, they tend to have a very high value target in mind. This grouping tends to have unlimited resources and a lot of time and a lot of expertise, because you see they want to be able to leverage tactics, techniques, and procedures that we've not seen before. So definitely a lot of research goes into that, and most of the time here you'll see, it will mainly be nation state sponsored advanced persistent threat actors that will be working here. So in summary, you've been able to see how we can be able to categorize the overall threats. And in summary, for the trends and challenges, like we said, we've seen the number of threats are growing exponentially. They are becoming more and more sophisticated by the day. Then the other challenge will be different organizations will have different security controls, different connections, different architecture of their networks. and most of them will have different security controls. So security control, you can think of endpoint as a control, network firewall as a different control, and most of the time you'll find that those different controls maybe are not even sharing the intelligence of what they are detecting. So again, another concern. And then the other thing is, already we have a shortage of talent, especially with cybersecurity. Globally, by 2022, it was estimated that there is a shortage of 3.5 million. So definitely this is increasing by the day. And definitely, because organizations still need to be able to identify, the people with the right cybersecurity skills and be able to retain them, it means that finding that person and retaining that person is actually very expensive. And some organizations, opt to be able to use automated technologies to try and address this particular gap in terms of the skills. Then the other thing will be, even if you have all these different security controls, all these tools we are talking about, you'll be getting a lot of alerts. And so if you're getting a lot of alerts, you need to be able to prioritize which ones actually need your attention and your time. And definitely, threat intelligence will be able to show you which of those alerts actually need your time. So let me just quickly see if there is any question before I proceed. And maybe at this point you can let me know, am I moving too fast? Are we okay? Can I move faster? Any feedback, anyone?
I think your teaching is okay. You're not that fast. You're just okay like that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so let's proceed. So now we'll get into the aligning definitions. So the main aim here is that before I start talking, I start mentioning different terms that you're not familiar with. We just try and make sure we have the same understanding, especially of what threat intelligence is. Then based on that, we can be able to proceed with this particular discussion. So aligning definitions. So I'll just use this. I came across this actually today, and I saw it's actually a very interesting approach to look at the different threats. So here you can see to the left, this is what we call the layers of the OSI. You can see we are starting from the physical. We have the data link, we have the network, we have the transport, session, presentation, application. I'll not get into the details of this, but the main aim for here is for us to be able to look, just quickly go through some of these attacks that can be leveraged using this. So for example, I'll just summarize. For example, sniffing. So for sniffing here, mainly our concern is that, for if the attack technique relates to sniffing, it means that someone will be able to eavesdrop on a particular communication. Definitely a big concern. If we get into spoofing, spoofing means someone can be able to disguise communication so that although the communication is coming from an unknown source, they want us to think it's actually the known and the legitimate source. So being able to disguise, the source of that particular communication, that will be spoofing, and it can be applied, in different ways. It can be emails from a spoofed email address. It can be even domain name resolution. It can be address resolution. It can even be an IP address. So for those of you that have worked a bit with the likes of, Kali and even Parrot, you know that you can be able to actually, for example, initiate communication to a particular target and be able to define which IP address you want to be seen as the source IP. So spoofing can also be done at that particular level. Then we also have phishing. So this phishing here, basically it means that the attacker is trying to masquerade as a trusted entity. So basically the attacker is trying to dupe the victim into believing that something is what it is not. So for example, someone sends you an email, they make you think that you want something, there is a link there, then you are prompted, and then there's a bit of urgency within the content of that email for you to be able to click that particular link. Once you click the link, maybe you end up being redirected to a website, and if you're not careful and you input your credentials, it means the attacker will be able to harvest those credentials. And so definitely that's also a concern. So just a way of being able to manipulate people to be able to get their credentials. So social engineering and the likes will fall under phishing. The other thing I'd like to talk about will be vulnerability versus an exploit. So vulnerability, let's think of it as a weakness in terms of the software. So a vulnerability is more of a weakness in the actual software. Then when we say exploit, we can think of it as an actual attack that is now exploiting the vulnerability. So it's exploiting the weakness that we've said is the vulnerability. And for an exploit to exist, it means that there is actually a definite path for it to be exploited. And that will be important for us to as we go through this presentation. So vulnerability is the weakness in the software. Exploit means an attack that is now taking advantage of that particular vulnerability. The other thing I did mention was APT, Advanced Persistent Threat. As the name suggests, we have advanced. So advanced means that there is a use of continuous and the main aim for an advanced persistent threat is that they want to get access to a particular environment, and they want to remain inside that environment and remain hidden for a prolonged period of time. Definitely, their goal is very destructive, and usually where we have seen advanced persistent threats being leveled, it's usually against high value targets. So for example, nation states, it can even be large corporations, and most of the time the ultimate goal is usually stealing sensitive or corporate data over an extensive period of time. So those are some of the terms that you might hear me mentioning from time to time. But again, since we are here, we can just quickly have an analogy so that I can be able to explain the next set of terms that we will be looking at. So the analogy here is, let's say for example, sorry. Sorry, just 1 minute. Okay, so the next set of terms that I need to go through, let me just quickly share on that. So the analogy here is, let's say we have an endpoint. So someone has a machine, a workstation, maybe a laptop. Let's say it has a free version of the antivirus running there. So we can say the only protection they have is that antivirus. So that user accesses a particular site. Maybe that site has been recently compromised, and then once they access the site, they download automatically. We have some files that are being downloaded onto that particular machine, and those files definitely will be landing on the file system of that particular laptop for this case. Ideally, if you have endpoint security, we expect the first thing will be it should be able to look at the different sites that you're visiting. So if it's a malicious site, it should be able to warn you, if not block you, just depending on the configuration. Then the other thing we expect it to be able to do is that once any file is being downloaded, we need to be able to scan that file. So we can easily be able to look at the reputation of that file. So reputation means, have we seen it before? Is it malicious or not? If it's a file, let's say for example, is it signed or not? So if it's signed, is it signed by a legitimate certificate, and is that certificate still valid? So we can be able to look at all those different attributes, and based on that we can be able to flag a file if it's malicious or not. The other thing we can be able to do is once the file has been downloaded on that particular machine, when it starts to run, we can now engage machine-based learning, whereby we can look at the behavior of that file. And if we see anything malicious about that file, we can be able to flag it. Now, based on that analogy, let's say you have a laptop, you've connected to a particular website, some files have been downloaded. Then once they were downloaded, you ended up clicking on those files, and then they started to run in the background. When they started running, they tried to connect, for example, to some additional websites. They downloaded some additional files. Even maybe they made some changes to the registry. So now, based on that particular analogy, we can be able to quickly summarize some of these items. So when you talk about threats, it can be malware, it can be the actual attack, and it can be advanced persistent threat groupings. So I'll not spend a lot of time on this, but if you go to this particular website, apt.securelist.com, you'll be able to see the different APT groups that exist. Oh, actually, let me just quickly show you this. So APT, let's see, we have this. So here on Secure List, you can be able to get information on the different advanced persistent threats, and even the latest information on the different threats being detected globally. So again, a very good source for threat intelligence in terms of what is happening globally, what has been detected, and just making sure you remain updated in terms of the threats that are targeting a specific industry or even a specific region. So there's that. Then we have indicator of compromise. So for example, for that example that I gave, we have a laptop, accessed a website, then we had all those additional files being downloaded, we had network connection to some domain, we had some changes being made on the registry of that particular machine. So all those are actually indicators of compromise. They are indicators of compromise because something has happened, we have reviewed that particular incident, and we've been able to get those details. So for example, from that one, we can be able to see the IP address of the website that was accessed. If a vulnerability was exploited, we'll be able to see it. And so again, very detailed. Again, very detailed approach in terms of being able to understand what are indicators of compromise. So something has happened, we are learning from that. That's indicators of compromise, and all those details. So if it's a file that was downloaded, the hash of that file can be an MD5 or a SHA-256. That becomes our indicator of compromise. A vulnerability was exploited, becomes our indicator of compromise. Now, the other set will be indicators of attack. Indicator of attack is mainly related to specific tactics. So like, for example, we saw persistence, we saw lateral movement in terms of the MITRE ATT&CK framework. So anything around that. So the actual way we are achieving lateral movement, for example, in our case, we saw there's something like remote access. So if it's something about remote access, that now, once we see it in the live environment, we can be able to use that as an indicator of attack. So this one we are learning from something that has happened, indicator of compromise. But indicator of attack, we want to identify something in real time. So when actually it's trying to execute, we can be able to look at any of these tactics. Like I said, we can be able to look at any of this, and then if we see it, let's say for example here, lateral movement, if we see this one, exploitation of remote, something that looks like exploitation of remote services, internal phishing and all this, we can be able to use machine learning, and we see any of this, we can be able to now use that as an indicator of attack, and then based on the configuration we can be able to do something about it. Okay, so I hope I've been able to summarize the differences between indicator of compromise and indicator of attack. Now, when it comes to threat models, usually we want to be able to have a systematic process to be able to identify potential threats. So we need to be able to understand if, is there a vulnerability, or do we have absence of the appropriate safeguards that are required? And then also we want to be able to understand how to be able to enumerate. So if there's a vulnerability, we want to be able to extract the details and to be able to get insights into how that particular vulnerability can be exploited. And then again, we want also to be able to prioritize how to be able to mitigate. So that will be the main components of the main reason why we need threat models. The most common one will be the Lockheed Martin. So probably you've come across this one. So we have these 7 phases. You can see we start with reconnaissance, weaponization, delivery, exploitation, installation, command and control, and exfiltration. Ideally, usually what we've seen is that definitely the first bits of this tend to be less noisy, because you can be able to do this, for example, using open source intelligence, or just being able to review, for example, if you have a target in mind, being able to understand which organization is the target, and being able to look at the different employees. Maybe you look at their profiles on LinkedIn, maybe you look at the website for that particular organization, and be able to just gather information passively. So reconnaissance, you'll see it definitely tends to be very hard to detect the initial ones, but once we get in it, you get access to that particular environment, and you want now to initiate things like data exfiltration, definitely a lot of security controls should be able to pick this. So in summary, multiple threat models will exist. Also, we have the meta attack framework, and these are important because they are able to help us to be able to understand how the threat actors will try to get into those particular environments and how they tend to operate. And so based on this, we can be able to come up with effective ways to be able to deal with them. So the other concern will be, we also need to be able to quickly understand there are several layers of the internet. So most people only know of the surface web. So this is what you access with your normal browser. But also you can see we have other 2 layers of the World Wide Web. You can see we have the deep web, we have the dark web. And definitely being able to access these ones requires a bit more understanding of what you need to be able to do. It's not as easy as the surface web. Surface web, you just need to know the public IP address and or maybe the domain, and you can be able to access the different web resources. But once you get into this, definitely you'll have some of them being accessed. The first thing will be you'll need probably a different browser, so something like a Tor browser. And then definitely the strings for the websites here are not easily readable using our normal, for example, English language. So again, the important thing here is that in terms of the threats and the information on threat intelligence, usually we've seen that the newest and the up-to-date information with respect, for example, to different threats being planned for a specific organization, or different data that has been breached and exfiltrated from a particular organization, you tend to find it easily, for example, being sold on the dark web forums. So again, the most valuable information will be found here, and we understand not all organizations actually understand this, and they will not have the resources to be able to do, for example, this continuous research on what is being, for example, on the dark web. So again, another important element as we talk about threat intelligence. And then generally, if information is on the surface web, it will be easy for us to gather it. And even this one can be fully automated. So we can even have web crawlers automatically be able to gather information that can be now processed and analyzed to become intelligence. Now, let's quickly summarize what intelligence is. I will not go through the details here, but the important thing here is that even when we look at the basic meaning of intelligence, you can see that there is a very varied basically intelligence means different things to different people. For some people it can be just information that helps in decision making. For others it can be that information should actually be able to answer specific questions. And you can see even in academics, again, decision making, but here it's more of a process, or a product that basically uses information from all sources to help in decision making. So here it's more related to the process, and here it's more of answering specific questions, and then here it's more of decision making. The important takeaway here is that secrecy is important. Secrecy is important because at the end of the day, just like you have access to the surface web, deep web, and the dark web, the threat actors also have access to the same. And so if all the threat intelligence that you have on the different threat actors, the operations, you are putting all that public, it means they'll be able to understand that you've already identified how they are approaching a particular how they are approaching a particular how they are basically how they are exploiting a particular organization.
Sorry. Okay.
And they will be able to once they understand that that particular technique has been identified, they'll just be able to adapt. So again, secrecy is important, and it's key in distinguishing. It's a key distinguishing element in terms of intelligence, and even despite the increasing popularity of open source intelligence. So when you say secrecy, it can be secrecy in terms of the information, and also it can be secrecy in terms of how you process the threat intelligence to come up with the end result. The other thing here to mention is that definitely there will always be gaps, because no one has 100% visibility into everything that is happening, and so there's no 100% accuracy. So because there will always be those gaps. So gaps means blind eyes. So it means that there's some portion of information that you are not getting. So for example, let's say we have a security vendor, they are covering mainly maybe the Americas, and they really don't have a good installation base in the let's say the larger Asia Pacific region. So that will mean that the threats that tend to be targeting organizations in that particular region, this particular vendor will not have visibility into that, and that is what we are talking about, the gaps. So you have intelligence, but it's really not covering a very extensive section of the overall threats. So if we look at cyber threat intelligence, cyber threat intelligence, in summary, we can think of it as another collection source. It focuses on being able to understand and assess the capabilities, the intentions, the activities of the foreign adversaries that are targeting your computer environment. And for this particular cyber threat intelligence, definitely we are focusing on technology focused intelligence, and there will be a lot of external influential factors that affect this. So for example, here, according to Gartner, threat intelligence is evidence-based knowledge that includes context, mechanism, indicators, implications, and action-oriented. So the important thing here is that threat intelligence should be actionable. It should be able to inform you of a specific action that you can be able to do with this threat intelligence. If you look at the intelligence cycle, in summary, you can see there are a lot of processes. Ideally, we start from raw data. So raw data can be just an individual unarguable fact. So for example, this computer has initiated a session to a particular website. So it's just a simple statement. The session will be, the session has been initiated. That's it. just a simple statement. Then the next thing will be, now we move to the information. So information is basically we just combine different data points, and then they'll now be able to answer a simple question. Then once we do further processing, we get to intelligence. So intelligence means that we can be able to integrate information and be able to now to actually draw insights from it and be able to inform decision making. So definitely it means that it's actionable intelligence because it's being able to inform a decision that we need to make. So in summary, from this particular slide, you can see that it's actually a very detailed process in terms of how you collect, how you come up with threat intelligence. For example, from the first bit, you need to be able to understand the specific items, the specific scope, and the specific goals of why you want to collect threat intelligence. Then you need to get into the details, how you collect, how you process, how you exploit, how you evaluate, analyze, how you disseminate. So once you have collected, processed, analyzed, cleaned up this particular information and this data to intelligence, at the end of the day, definitely you want to disseminate. It can be disseminate to different customers, it can be disseminate to different public groups, and so also this will be important. Then once you disseminate, you need to be able to understand how your intended audience will be able to consume that threat intelligence, and then also you need to be able to provide an avenue for them to be able to give feedback. So based on whatever you give them, are they able to consume it? Did it provide value to them? Are there ways that you can be able to improve the threat intelligence that you are offering? So again, very important for us to be able to understand this. And so before we move into the external threat intelligence sources, let me quickly see if there is any burning question that has been. Okay, there is a request for the manual. Okay, I think the session is also being recorded, so you can always be able to review this. I'll also be sharing the slides, so no problem. So any questions that you have, kindly just post them here. It does not need to be related to threat intelligence, as long as it's related to cybersecurity or networking. I should be able to just leverage my experience to provide some guidance. Okay, external sources. So threat intelligence, we have external and we have internal sources. External sources basically means, for example, you can be getting it from different sources. It can be a security vendor. It can be for example, computer emergency and response centers that share information, for example, of threats that are targeting a particular region. For example, it can be West Africa, or even it can be very specific. It can be for Nigeria. And even you can be able to drill down. Maybe it's for a specific financial, maybe a specific sector. So either government or even financial institutions. So you can be able to get such information. Those will be external sources. Then there are different, there are other items. You can even have corporate sharing groups. So we have different grouping of corporates, and then they are sharing information in terms of generally what they're experiencing. So again, another good source for external sources of intelligence. Then generally we have, the print media. So this will be newspapers and the likes. We have social media. Even we have public sandboxes. I'll be able to share a bit on this public sandboxes, and even we have the dark web. So all these are sources of threat intelligence that will be external to you. So it's external to you, or even external to the organization that is consuming this threat intelligence. Sources of external threat intelligence, for example, we have computer emergency and response. So these ones will be many. Probably every other country has one of them. And then we have open source intelligence. So let me just quickly show you what open source threat intelligence is. So open source intelligence, this one is free, easily accessible by anyone. So as you can see here, just go to osintframework.com. So this is a collection of different tools that can be able to give you different information. So let's say you're doing reconnaissance, or you're just trying to understand a specific threat that you have detected on your endpoint. So for example, here, let's say it's a domain name. So you can just come here, select on domain name. It will be able to show you all the different web resources that deal with that. Then based on that, you can just even do further drill down. Let's say, let's just continue. So all these are tools. So instead of you needing to understand all these different tools that are publicly available and can be able to help you get information on different items, you can just you just need to know this open source intelligence framework. Then from it, you will be able to get to the different websites, and then once you get to them, you just click on it. You can see it will be able to open for you. And then let's say, for example, here you wanted to get information on a specific domain. What can I use? Let's say CNN. Let's say that's the domain. It can be anything ideally. So you can see here quickly, you can be able to get information. What is the public IP of that particular domain? All the details here. We can even be able to do, trace route, understand how traffic is being routed there. If there are DNS records, who is publishing them. You can even be able to understand, for example, who registered this particular domain. So all those different things you can be able to get. So here we just did domain name. You can still do IP address. You can see the category is basically very varied in terms of what you can be able to do. And this is accessible to anyone. So as long as you have internet, you can just go here. You can be able to drill down into anything. Let's see one more. Let's say people search engines. Even there is a register for different. So if you're trying to get information on a specific person, any of these web resources, you can just be able to input, for example, their name, and you'll be able to get information. So for example, which accounts they have on social media, what are their handles, even for some of the items here, you can be able to input, for example, the phone number, be able to understand that phone number is related to who. Generally, what I've seen is that for some of the tools here tend to be covering, they tend to have databases of people in the West. But generally, for the other items that are not people related, you get a lot of information. So this is important because we are assuming you're using this either to understand a threat that you have detected on your endpoint or understand a specific, maybe you're doing something like blue teaming. So you're trying to understand what information is available on a specific company, and it's out there in the public. And if you can access this, it means that also the threat actors can also be able to access this. So it's important for you to also be able to scan this, understand what is there, and then be able to understand how you can remain anonymous. So again, a very important tool, open source intelligence, basically a collection, and it's continually growing. So sites are, different web resources are continually being added with the respective categories. So here you see social networks. You can be able to look for Facebook, Twitter, and all this, and all of them. You can just click, drill down. You can see. So there are a lot of web resources for you to be able to do such. I think there's someone on who needs to be on mute. Okay, let me see if I can just copy it. Okay, so you can look at that. Yes, so there's a lot of information. So it just depends, because as you can see, there are a lot of tools. So there are a lot of tools that can be used to do the same thing. So the idea here is that you have a lot of resources. You can be able to use whichever works best for you. Similar to that comparison, people are always asking which one is better. Is it Kali Linux or do we go with Parrot because you want to, get into penetration testing? Again, it can be more of preference, but options are always good. because once you experiment with the different options, you'll be able to see what actually makes your work easier. Okay, now here also you can see we have some additional sources. I'll not go through this, but for the public sandbox, you can see we have AnyRun, we have hybrid analysis. For the URLs, if you're trying to understand a URL that you have seen in on your endpoint or on your environment, you can just input here on URL scan.io and you'll be able to understand what it's related to. All these tools are very important because you just want to be able to quickly focus on the threats that actually need your attention, and they are giving you that context. So for those who are not familiar, VirusTotal, it's a very well-known utility, free. Okay, most of it is free. Ideally, you can be able to upload any file, and then if that file is malicious, you'll be able to know. You can even paste a URL here to see if it's malicious or not. You can even search anything. So a URL, an IP address, a domain, a file hash. You can be able to do all this. A sandbox is important because let's say you have a file and then you're not sure if that file is malicious or not, and you want to be able to run it in a secure environment and still see if it's malicious or not. This is one of them. So this is one of the tools you can use. So we have VirusTotal as one of them. You can upload the file here. We have AnyRun. We have hybrid analysis. Again, same thing. You just upload the file and then get the details if it's malicious. And if it's malicious, you can see even the details about it. What are those indicators of compromise that we talked about earlier? If it's a URL that you've come across and you want to see what it relates to, you can see all this. There is a lot of information here. Let's see, I don't know what this one is related to, but you can see any domain you have, you can just input, you can be able to see a summary of it. The website has been contacted 3 IPs into countries, all that information. So you can be able to get context on that particular object. So here object, I'm referring to a domain, an IP address, a file, any of those things. Again, very important because something has been flagged as malicious. You just want to be able to quickly see if it's malicious and then you respond. Also, Kaspersky has this. So OpenTip, again, similar to VirusTotal, can be able to look up. So if you have an IP address, domain, all that, input here, you can be able to query our database and see what we know about that particular resource. Again, there are a lot of tools, and all these you've seen are basically open. These are free versions of everything. So a lot of free, open, external sources of threat intelligence. Like I said, for any of this, remember there's always that aspect of the gap. So that blind eye in terms of what exactly does the coverage of the particular provider of that threat intelligence. If they're not covering your region, it means they will be blind to the actual threats in your particular region. So you also need to be able to understand, their sources of threat intelligence. So what are their collection sources, and is your region covered? Again, very important. It's all about the details. For those that think this is a lot of work, open source intelligence, being able to drill into all of this, we actually have tools that automate all this. So one of them will be Maltigo. So Maltigo will be able to, you just input what you need. It can be able to search any of these repositories of open source intelligence and be able to give you information on what you need. So instead of you needing to do all this manual work, Maltigo can easily automate that for you. Again, very easy way to go about it. Now, usually for organizations, another important source will be the internal sources. So internal sources, something is already happening in your environment. You just want to be able to collect that, analyze, and then based on that, you can be able, for example, to detect if, for example, we have some evasive threat in your environment. So what will be the common sources? You can see security control logs. Again, very important. We have network device logs, we have application logs, Active Directory logs, DNS logs, operating system logs. This is very important because at the end of the day, if you're not logging what is happening in your environment, and for example, you have a web application, it has been hit, the logs have been cleared, and then you're not, for example, forwarding these logs to, for example, a log archiving server, it means that the attacker gets access to the application web server. They do whatever they need to do, and then when they're clearing their tracks, they decide to delete the logs. You don't have a backup of those logs externally where they don't have access to. So you'll have very limited visibility into what exactly they did. So forensics will be a big challenge. Again, logging, very important, a very important source for internal intelligence. In summary, how Kaspersky works. So for us, again, it's very important because, like I said, the gap is very important. You need to be able to make sure that you use threat intelligence that covers your particular region very well. So for Kaspersky threat intelligence, we have petabytes, not even terabytes, petabytes of aggregated statistical data from very heterogeneous sources that are very diverse, and we use very highly reliable sources. One of them will be Kaspersky Security Network, so all our global users will opt to decide if they want to participate in our cloud-based intelligence or not. So this is Kaspersky Security Network. So globally, we have customers in more than 213 countries. So all these guys are connecting to security network. It means we have visibility in terms of the threats that are being experienced across all those 213 plus countries. So again, global reach, very important to reduce that gap. Then also we do have a lot of automated technologies, web crawlers, botnet monitoring, spam traps, sensors, all this. So all this can be easily automated, and you can see also open source intelligence is also here. So we are collecting information from all this plus this. Then this information needs to be refined, needs to be analyzed. So a lot of automation is here, but additionally we also have analysts that will be able to also review what the output of this before we publish it out to our customers. So again, very important for us because we need to make sure we have extensive sources of threat intelligence. We need to make sure we process it intensively, because at the end of the day, if I'm giving you threat intelligence and it's supposed to inform you in terms of decision making, and that threat intelligence has a lot of false positives. So false positive means that we are saying something is malicious and actually it is not malicious. It means I will be wasting a lot of your time and a lot of your resources, and that can easily allow the actual malicious incident to be able to escape your visibility, or maybe escape your response in near real time. So again, very important coverage, quality of processing, and the actual output, how you apply it. Okay, threat intelligence types. We can quickly summarize them into three. So we have tactical. Tactical tends to be the easiest intelligence to generate, and mainly it tends to be highly automated, and open sources tend to be the most common sources for this. Here, like we said, indicators of compromise. So if you remember from the beginning, our analogy, we have a laptop connects to the internet, then the internet downloads malicious files. Then when the file is running, it tries to do some additional, maybe making some registry changes, downloading additional files and all that. So all those are our indicators of compromise. So we are learning that. So again, the easiest to generate. Then we have operational intelligence. So operational here, it's more of adversarial oriented, and here we mainly just want to be able to get the technical details about specific attacks or specific campaigns. So we need to, for operational, we want to understand who was the attacker, why they attacked you, and how they attacked you. So again, tools, tactics, procedures, like we saw under the MITRE ATT&CK framework. This tends to be used a lot, especially by security operation centers, incident response teams, vulnerability management teams, as well as threat monitoring teams. Then lastly, we have strategic. So strategic here, it's more of threat intelligence that will inform a business, mainly based on, for example, decisions and process behind that particular threat. So it's more of the bigger picture. Let's say, for example, let's say we have a particular country. That country is, for example, facing some um, some economic sanctions. So it means that they really don't have a lot of avenues to be able to generate, revenue. So it means for that particular country, maybe some of the groupings there decide to go into, creation teams at the corporates are outside their region so that they can be able to generate that. So you see there is political, there is economic aspects that led to that particular grouping doing all that. And so here, strategic, it's more of a report. The report will have a summary that will be able to inform you in terms of the overall trends, the reason for the trends, the reason for the specific actors that are being involved in that particular campaign. And then based on this, it means that it will be able to easily inform the business in terms of being able to make different decisions. So in summary, tactical, operational, strategic threat intelligence types. So in summary, we've talked a lot, we've seen everything. We've seen how to collect, what will be the typical cycle. We've seen the external sources of threat intelligence. We've seen the internal sources of threat intelligence, the types of threat intelligence. So in summary, I'll just use the Kaspersky products to show you how you can be able to actually apply this intelligence in different organizations. So maybe some of you are wondering why Kaspersky, why Kaspersky for threat intelligence. Definitely, actually, we do a good job in terms of threat intelligence. There are many reports, but the most common one you'll come across for threat intelligence will be Forrester Wave External Threat Intelligence. The last one was in Q1 2021. And you can be able to look up this one. You'll be able to see how the different security vendors have been grouped. And you'll see that actually Kaspersky is doing a good job. And definitely that does give me some credibility in terms of being able to share the different approaches that are there that you can be able to use and our different products. But we can be able to further break down them into four. So the first one would be tactical. So for tactical here, we have things like threat intelligence reporting, we have APT, advanced persistent threat reports, industrial control systems reports, financial threat intelligence. So for here, it's more of, you just want to be able to, you want your internal team to be able to understand the overall threats, be able to understand who are the threat actors, and then be able to use this information, for example, to see or hunt for any of the indicators of compromise that are related to any of the main threats in your particular region. Again, tactical. Then we have technical. So here it's more of enhancing security. So maybe you have a firewall, you have endpoint security. It can even be from a different vendor, and then you just want to now plug this threat intelligence that you have collected from this particular vendor, and then you want to be able to look at what is being detected in your environment by the different security controls, and then you want to see if there's anything that is malicious or not. And once it has been identified, you can be able to focus on that, on the critical ones. Again, threat data feeds, technical. Then strategic, here it's more of, for example, you have an organization, the organization wants to understand from outside and from inside, what does my digital footprint look like? What are the threats that I have? Which threats can be compromised? And so here the organization just says, I want to get a bird's eye view of my entire digital footprint. I see everything I have, and then I see, similar to what the threat actor will see, and then based on that, I can be able to patch, those security gaps that I have. So digital footprint intelligence. Then also we have additional tools, especially for operational. So here, for example, customer has a security operation center. They want to be able to quickly look up different malicious objects or suspicious objects that they have come across. They can be able to use all this. So let me see if there are any questions before I show you our threat intelligence portal. And then we are almost done. So kindly, any questions you have, this will be the time. So just keep on adding your questions here so that I can address them before we are done. Okay, so let's quickly.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
So that this that link you opened the other time. That I want to know how you can identify a virus attack.
Okay. Okay. Fine enough, Innocent. I think we have an example. I think one of the demos will just summarize how you can do that. So I hope the demo will address that. Okay. So let's quickly get it. Yes.
Hello.
Yep.
Sorry. Good evening. Please, I want to ask, because I have a lot of questions. At the end of the demo, will I be able to ask those questions?
Yes, you can even continue pasting any that you can paste on the chat. You can just paste as we continue, and we'll address also those. But at the end, there's a Q&A session also.
Okay. Let me wait till that time.
Okay. Okay, so let me quickly show you what our threat intelligence portal looks like. So for a free version of our threat intelligence portal, there's this. So opentip.kaspersky.com. So this is the free version, but definitely it's limited. But now we have the commercial version. As you can see, this is the one. It's a paid service. For you to be able to log in, you definitely need a certificate. So once someone pays for the service, they can be able to access this. Now, for example, let's see. From the dashboard, you can quickly see the overall threats globally. So we can say, let's say, for example, we are interested in. Let me zoom in. Let's say we are interested. I'm looking at the percentage. There's something I want first. Uh, 21531. Okay, let's focus on here. Okay, for the purpose of here, so you can see here, Nigeria would be number 65 in terms of the most attacked countries based on our input, based on our detections. Again, like I said, we have Kaspersky security network amongst other things, so definitely with more than 200 million users globally, it means that we have a good representation of the overall threats globally. So here, Nigeria, you can see we can even drill down what are the top threats for that particular country. All of them are here. So if it's a file or an application, you can even see the hash. So for our case, the MD5 hash for that particular threat. If it's the top URLs, top malicious URLs being accessed by that from that particular country, you can see we can get those details. If it's the top 10 command and control sites that are being accessed by users in that particular country, all that information is here. All this information, you can just click to drill down and get more details on it. So again, very easy to drill down. Okay, so this is as this one loads. Okay, but ideally you can see you can just be able to quickly click, get more details on it. So you can see here we've seen this domain is being accessed. We've seen our reputation is that it is dangerous. What is additional context around it? The first time we saw it, let's say, for example, this domain was created on 1st April 2021, it expires on 1st April 2022, the domain name is this one, the number of URLs, number of times you've seen, endpoints trying to access it, more than 100K, the total number of hits. Then you can see who is the registrar of that particular domain. So if, for example, additional details are here for the user, for the actual user that registered this, all that will be provided. Then categories for this particular domain, you can see it's related to malware, botnets, and backdoors. Then you can even see globally the heat map. What are the countries that have been accessing it the most? So you can be able to see, the hits by the country. Then you can even see a timeline of the time that a timeline of when it got the most hits. So if there's a specific, if it's a campaign, then there's a specific time when we had a surge. All that information is here. Then you can see additionally the details of that particular all that information. So again, very important. So let's say, for example, if you're having maybe a solution and then you've seen it flagging this, or maybe you've not been getting it, but now you want to see, have you seen any of the endpoints in that customer or in that environment trying to access this domain? Then you see it's giving you context. You're getting to understand this is the threat. This is a common command and control site. It's dangerous. We've seen people in this particular region accessing it. We know it's related to these categories of malwares. And additionally, we can even be able to see the different DNS resolutions that are related to it, and all this. So any of this can be your indicator of compromise. So the file can be the hash, it can be the IP address of the file of the site being accessed. It can actually be the files accessed, the actual files that initiated the request for that particular domain. So all these are your indicators of compromise, and you can be able to search for any of this across your environment to see if it has been detected, and if it's there, it means you have been compromised, and now that you know, you can actually be able to do something about it. Additional, for example, other domains that will be related to it, all this is information in terms of that particular threat. So as you can, this is what we call context. So you started from one point, it was just maybe a domain that was flagged, but now access to threat intelligence has been able to give you additional visibility. If it was a campaign that was running for a specific period, you can be able to see all that. Then there are details around any additional files or additional sites that might have been accessed, and you can search for all this in your environment. And if you find this in your environment, in the log environment, it means probably you have an endpoint that has been compromised. Okay, let's go back here, dashboard. Okay, I don't need this. So let's get into the other reports just quickly. So you can see there are a lot of services. Some of these services is threat lookup. So here maybe I just want to look up something. Maybe I want to look up CNN. So this can be anything. It's only that I'm avoiding, using any legitimate domain. That can be a concern. So I'm just using this. You can see for anything that you paste here, it can be an IP address, it can be a file, it can be a domain. You'll be able to get context, reputation. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it malicious? Then the additional details around it. Again, very important, because you just want to save time. You just want to understand, this is what I have seen in my environment. I want to know, is it malicious or not? If it's malicious, what other items are related to it, and then you can be able to use all that information to respond. Okay, the next thing is you can see we have who is lookup. Who is lookup, you just want to understand more details, for example, about a specific domain. So you want to understand who is the owner of that particular domain that you have seen in, you've seen a lot of endpoints in your environment trying to access. So is it malicious or not? You can even use the domain name, you can use the IP address, you can even define a tracker. So you say, I want to track this domain so that if any information about that particular domain changes, I want to be notified. So again, you can also be able to do all that. So you can create a rule, then the rule can be defined, it runs for how long, and then you just create the tracking rule. So anything changes about this domain or that IP address of interest, you will be able to get that notification by default. So the other things that you can be able to do is, I talked about the reports. Reports is very important because for organizations, they just want to get information upfront in terms of the threats that, for example, are targeting their particular environment. Actually, now that I'm here, maybe I can just also, I'll just give you this. This is also one of our free expert trainings that we have. So I'll just post it here because it popped up. So whenever you have time, I hope it's actually a link. So whenever you have time, just go through that particular training. You'll just maybe be given you'll not go through the entire course. It's more like an intro, but you'll be able to understand, for example, how these different expert trainings work. So what is targeted malware reverse engineering? Just click on it, request for demo access, and then you'll just see, at least you'll get an understanding of how the tools that are used for reverse engineering and how it works. Also, it's fairly practical, so you'll also get to test out a few things. And you can see the actual full course is actually not very cheap, but at least you'll be able to understand what it entails. And if you get to that point, or that is an area of interest, definitely it will make a lot of sense for you to go through that training. So APT reports, here you can see we have different reports. For purposes of here, I'll just do Nigeria. So the reports have different tags, and then based on those tags, you can just do a quick search based on that. So you can see here, I will not be showing one of the latest reports because of obvious reasons, because it's a paid service. So I'll just use one of the older ones. So let's say we do 2019. Okay, let's do this one. So you can see for the reports, we'll have the information on that particular report. We'll have the executive summary. Executive summary, it's basically just a few slides. The idea here is that it should be easy to consume, especially for management. So